It was a cold February night in 2005 when a woman in Chicago was sitting down for dinner and her phone rang. It was her mother, who lived just a few blocks away, and she sounded desperate. Without giving any explanation, her mother said only, "You need to come now. Run." And it was exactly at that moment that the woman realized that the worst, that thing the family had feared for so long, might have finally happened. An ordinary morning. On the morning of February 28th, 2005, a 64-year-old man named Michael Lefkow walked down the stairs limping inside his home in Chicago, Illinois. He had injured his Achilles tendon playing tennis the week before and was now getting around on crutches and an orthopedic boot. When he reached the kitchen, he saw his wife Joan preparing breakfast for the whole house, which included both of them, their teenage daughter Meg, and Joan's elderly mother, Donna, 89, who had been living with them for a few months due to health issues. Michael said good morning to his wife and limped to the dining room, where Meg was finishing her eggs. They chatted for a few minutes until the school bus honked outside. Meg grabbed her backpack and ran out. Shortly after, Joan entered the room with a plate of food and orange juice for her husband, and the two remained at the table chatting with their usual tranquility. At one point, Michael asked what was on her schedule for that day, and he meant it literally, as Joan Lefkow was a federal judge. She carried on her shoulders the weight of decisions that sometimes navigated that gray zone between the morally right and the legally correct. It was a real burden, and sometimes her rulings put her in risky situations. Michael knew that better than anyone. He was a lawyer himself. But that morning in particular, Joan's answer was reassuring. Nothing too intense, no major pending decisions. It would be an ordinary day. Michael then mentioned that because of his injury, he wouldn't go to the office, he would work from home. Joan smiled, grabbed her things, said goodbye, and left. About half an hour later, around 9 a.m., Donna came down the stairs leaning on her two canes. Michael, despite being injured, immediately got up, went to her, and helped her down the last steps with care. He took her to the dining room and settled her into her favorite chair. After she was comfortably seated and said she didn't need anything else, Michael thought, now it's time to work. He grabbed his files and went down to the basement, where his home office was located. The noise in the closet. When he reached the bottom of the basement stairs, Michael walked down a hallway that led to a door. He entered, sat at the desk, and began reviewing the files piled in front of him. That was when he thought he heard something. A rustling, coming from the utility closet inside the office itself. Michael stayed quiet and listened. The noise returned. He thought, perhaps it's the boiler making some strange sound. But something bothered him. That sound didn't seem mechanical. And so, moved by curiosity, Michael stood up, limped to the closet, turned the handle, and opened the door. What was on the other side would change everything. The silence that scared Joan. At 5 p.m. that same afternoon, Joan Lefkow left the federal courthouse and went to her car in the parking lot. She was uneasy. She had called Michael a few times during the afternoon, and none of the calls had been answered, which was completely out of character for him. It was so worrying that Joan even called her daughter Meg, asking if she had spoken to her father. Meg said no, but that she had stopped by the house after school to pick up gym clothes. When she was there, the house was silent, and she simply assumed her father and grandmother were taking a nap. Joan took about half an hour to get home, and when she entered the garage, it was already getting dark. She unlocked the front door, went in, and called for Michael. Nothing. She called for her mother. Nothing. She walked through the entire first floor. No sign of trouble. No sign of them. She went upstairs hoping to find them sleeping. Checked every room. Empty. The only place left was the basement. But at that hour, it made no sense for Michael or Donna to be down there. Even so, with her heart in her throat, Joan went to the entrance leading to the basement stairs, took a deep breath, turned on the lights, and called out one more time. Silence. She went down. When she reached the bottom of the stairs and looked down the hallway leading to Michael's office, she didn't see anything at first. But then her gaze drifted to the floor and she saw blood. She ran down the hall, shouting for her husband. She grabbed the door handle, opened it, and what was in front of her was so shocking, so terrifying, that her brain simply refused to process it. She instinctively closed the door, turned, ran back up the stairs, and called 911. The crime scene. Late that night, Special Agent Douglas Seacom from the FBI Chicago field office stepped under the yellow police tape surrounding the Lefkow home. When the Chicago police received the 911 call and learned that the caller was a federal judge, the FBI was immediately called in to participate in the investigation. Joan and her daughters, not just Meg, but also the 3 adult daughters who no longer lived at home, had been taken to a safe house by the United States Marshals. Seacom entered the residence and found forensic teams already working intensely in every room. On the first floor, no blood, no signs of a struggle. The TV and other valuable electronics were still in place, ruling out robbery. He found the basement stairs and went down. In the basement hallway, there were a few police officers and a forensic photographer gathered around a door. Seacom moved forward and entered the office. Inside, there were 2 bodies, a man lying face down and an elderly woman lying on her back, with a large pool of blood beneath them both. Both had clear gunshot wounds to the head, and there were shell casings scattered on the floor. On the other side of the office, the doors of a utility closet were open. Seacom entered. There was a large boiler, and next to it, on the floor, a 12-pack of beer, with 1 bottle missing. Seacom looked around. He didn't find the 12th bottle. But when he turned and looked back at the office, he spotted a high window that looked out to the ground level outside. On the frame of that window was a shelf, and resting there was the missing bottle. The window itself was broken. Seacom stood for a few seconds processing that. The killer had left beer behind? Was it intentional, a message? Or was it a mistake? He called the forensic team to bag the bottle and collect DNA and fingerprints. Then, he left the office so the team could spray the entire basement with leucocrystal violet, a chemical substance that illuminates blood traces invisible to the naked eye. As he walked up the stairs, Seacom was already reflecting. Broken window, probably the killer's entry point. This suggested he didn't know the victims personally, didn't have a key to the house. But the beer bottle was a disturbing detail. Someone who stops to have a drink in the middle of a double murder and still leaves the bottle behind? This was incredibly careless and contradictory to the idea of a premeditated and professional attack. And there was still the elephant in the room. Joan Lefkow was a federal judge. Michael was her husband. Donna was her mother. Was this intentional? Was she the real target? What the chemical substance revealed. An hour later, when Seacom returned to the basement, the chemical substance had revealed something important. There were traces of blood scattered all over the basement hallway. At least one of the victims had been shot in the hallway and then moved into the office. And the killer had tried to clean the hallway with some product. But biological traces remained visible under the chemical substance. For Seacom, this was crucial information. Someone who stays to clean the crime scene after committing 2 murders did not act on impulse. That was planned. The question was just the motive and who the real target was. Seacom went door to door through the neighborhood. Most of the neighbors didn't have much to say, but then he reached a nearby church and the pastor opened the door. After hearing about the incident, the pastor said that something strange had happened earlier that day. He had noticed a red car parked nearby for a while, with 2 men inside, smoking and drinking cans of what looked like Coca-Cola. They simply didn't fit in with the neighborhood. Seacom asked if the pastor could help in creating a composite sketch. The pastor said yes, and when he pointed to the exact spot where the car was, Seacom looked at the ground and found cigarette butts and an empty Coca-Cola can. The forensic team was called immediately to collect the material. Joan points to the suspects. Later that same night, Seacom sat across from Joan Lefkow at the safe house. Joan placed a glass of water in front of him and sat on the other side of the table. She looked surprisingly composed, but Seacom could feel that underneath that calm, there was a deep and contained fury. After a few words about the tragedy, Seacom got straight to the point. He asked about the pack of beers in the basement closet, and Joan explained that they were leftovers from a party they had thrown earlier that same week. She herself had put the bottles in the closet, and when she did, they were all sealed. This confirmed that the bottle found on the window shelf had been opened and handled by the killer. Seacom then asked if Joan could think of anyone who might want to do this. Almost without hesitation, she cited 3 cases. The first was Sean Peters, leader of a local gang whom Joan had sentenced to a long prison term. Any member of the gang could have acted in retaliation. The second was Richard Young, an armed robber whom Joan described as genuinely scary in the courtroom, the type of person who seemed capable of anything. And the third was Matthew Hale. Seacom recognized the name before Joan even finished speaking. Hale was one of the most notorious white supremacists in all of Illinois. 6 years earlier, one of his followers had committed a shooting attack that left 2 dead and 9 wounded. A few years back, Hale had come into direct conflict with Joan over a trademark dispute. A church in Oregon with the same name as Hale's group had sued the organization, and Joan had enforced a ruling that forced Hale to change the group's name. Hale's response was to try to have her killed. In the year prior to this case, he had been convicted for exactly that: conspiracy to murder a federal judge. He was still in prison awaiting sentencing. Hale couldn't have pulled the trigger personally, but he had a legion of followers willing to do things like that for him. The man who laughed. The next day, March 1st, Seacom sat across from Matthew Hale in a prison visiting room. Hale was a neatly groomed man with a serious expression, in his 30s, and he showed not the slightest disturbance upon hearing that the husband and mother of Joan Lefkow had been brutally murdered. When Seacom finished speaking, Hale laughed. He said he and his followers had absolutely nothing to do with it. Seacom warned that it didn't matter. Agents were at that moment seizing his phone and computer records, and if he had said anything about the Lefkows to anyone, they would find out. Hale just leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and smiled. "You won't find anything." And Seacom, contrary to what he expected to feel, thought, perhaps he is telling the truth. Back at the command center, the task force, which gathered the FBI, Chicago police, and U.S. Marshals, began to scour all the correspondence Hale had received in prison. Hundreds of letters. No mention of the Lefkows. But then something caught Seacom's attention. For months, Hale had exchanged letters with a woman named Kathleen Robertazzo, basically every 2 days, more than with anyone else, including his own family. On the surface, the letters contained nothing incriminating, but that frequency was suspicious. What they were speaking in code. The return address was from a suburb of Chicago, about 50 kilometers from the prison. Seacom gathered all the letters and used them as evidence to obtain a search warrant. The wrong red car. On the night of March 2nd, Seacom led an FBI team to Kathleen's house. When they drove up the driveway, they saw that the parked car was red, exactly like the car the pastor had described. Seacom's heart raced. Kathleen opened the door. She received the warrant with annoyance, but not with surprise. While the agents searched the house, Seacom spoke to her outside. She admitted to having a relationship with Hale, but corrected Seacom coldly. "I am not a white supremacist. I'm a white separatist." Seacom sighed and moved on, asking for her alibi for the day of the murders. When the agents walked out of the house, carrying Kathleen's computer, Seacom looked at the red car in the driveway, and he realized that car didn't match the pastor's description. It was definitely not the same vehicle. 2 days later, on Friday, March 4th, 4 days after the murders, Seacom walked into a meeting with the task force carrying a cup of coffee. Everyone was exhausted. Kathleen's alibi had been confirmed. Her computer revealed nothing, and she was cleared as a suspect. The team had interviewed dozens of Hale's followers. 3 were detained for starting fights with investigators, but one by one, all were ruled out. Sean Peters and Richard Young, the other 2 names Joan had mentioned, had also been discarded. 4 days of high-profile investigation, more than 200 tips received, and nothing. Everything was becoming a dead end. It was then that Seacom asked a question that no one had asked out loud until then. What if we all simply jumped to conclusions? Was the intended victim even Joan? He couldn't remember any other case where a judge's family had been murdered and not the judge themselves. The supervisor announced that the FBI would offer a $50,000 reward for information. In the following days, hundreds of new calls came in, but still nothing that led anywhere concrete. The correspondence. On a Tuesday, 9 days after the murders, Seacom was at the command post when his cell phone rang. It was the deputy director of the forensic lab. The fingerprints from the beer bottle found on the window shelf in the basement had been analyzed and run through the database. And there was a match. What really happened? Based on forensic evidence and the killer's confession, the reconstruction of events is as follows. Around 4:30 a.m. on February 28, 2005, while everyone in the Lefkow house slept, the killer broke the basement window and climbed inside, bringing a weapon with him. The plan was to hide in the utility closet all day, wait for the house to empty, and then sneak upstairs to ambush the person he wanted revenge on. A cold, calculated plan, but one that depended on a variable the killer hadn't considered. Michael was working from home. Around 9 a.m., still hiding in the closet, the killer heard footsteps coming down the basement stairs, walking down the hallway, entering the office. He heard the sound of someone sitting at the desk, leafing through papers. And then he heard footsteps approaching the closet. The handle turned, the door opened, and there was Michael Lefkow, on crutches, completely surprised, looking directly at the killer. The panic was instantaneous. The killer raised the weapon and shot Michael in the head at point-blank range. He fell. There was blood everywhere. And then, coming from the hallway, a voice arrived. "Michael? Michael, is that you?" Donna, Joan's elderly mother, had heard the shot. She was coming down the hallway with her canes, with an expression of pure alarm. In a state of continuous panic, the killer stepped out of the closet, advanced down the hall, and shot her too. Donna fell bleeding in the hallway. The killer then dragged her body into the office and left it next to Michael. He shot each of them one more time, to be sure. After that, he went back to the utility closet, and his eyes met the pack of beers on the floor. He was in shock. He had just killed 2 people who were not his target. 2 innocent people. He took one of the bottles, opened it, and took a slow sip while trying to think. Should he still wait for Joan? Eventually, he decided he couldn't. He needed to change the plan. He placed the bottle on the window shelf, went to get a sponge and bleach, and tried to clean the blood from the hallway. But there was simply too much blood. Around 1:15 p.m., he gave up and left through the same broken window he had entered through, leaving behind the bottle with his DNA and fingerprints intact. Bart Ross. The killer was a man named Bart Ross, and he was very far from being a professional criminal. Bart was a cancer patient who had lost part of his jaw during medical treatment. Resentful of the disfigurement, he tried to sue his doctors. The case arrived in Joan Lefkow's court, which dismissed it. To Bart, that was the last straw. Over the following years, he became increasingly paranoid and disconnected from reality, fueling an obsessive vendetta against everyone he blamed for his situation. Doctors, lawyers, judges. He had even put together a list of 25 people he wanted to kill. Joan Lefkow was at the top, but upon entering her house with the intention of murdering her, he ended up killing 2 completely innocent people. And that shook him to such a degree that he simply abandoned the plan and left, leaving behind the evidence that would turn him in. Ross's fingerprints and DNA were found not only on the beer bottle, but in other spots in the house. As for those cigarette butts and the Coca-Cola found on the sidewalk where the red car had been seen, they had nothing to do with him. And Ross also didn't match the composite sketches of the 2 men seen by the pastor. The investigation's conclusion was that that red car was probably just a coincidence unrelated to the crime, and that Ross had acted completely alone. On March 9th, 2005, just one day after the fingerprint results came back from the forensic lab, police in Wisconsin spotted Bart Ross's van parked near a federal courthouse in Milwaukee. When they approached, Ross killed himself with a gunshot. Inside the van, the police found a note. In it, Ross confessed in detail to the murders of Michael Lefkow and Donna Humphrey, two people who weren't on any suspect list, two names that no one had even considered, two victims who died in the wrong place at the wrong time, simply because a disturbed man had chosen to hide in their basement closet, and all because of a beer bottle left in the wrong place. Sometimes, the prime suspect in a case is someone we would never even imagine. A story this complex and full of twists shows how the police must always pay attention to the smallest details, such as the bottle. They can also end up following false leads, like the red car. Well, this serves as a warning to us all. Sometimes, danger hides exactly where we least expect it.